All right. Our emphasis today is Rome. And we're going to really get a broad overview of Rome. You could take really a whole semester and you can think about Roman history, Roman culture, anthropology, sociology, a lot of that stuff. I mean, you could take quite a few weeks and just break down Rome. A lot of history there, okay? So we're just going to do a really quick overview of it. How has Rome affected us today? This is one particular way in which Rome has affected us. It's affected us in many ways, but this is one. It'll be what? Well, more than just football. What is football to us? It's a sport, right? But what it is, it's a spectator sport. It is entertainment, right? So you may want to write down the Colosseum as the first thing, okay? So you guys, I'm assuming you're aware of the Colosseum. The Colosseum is a large arena-like structure that's built in Rome. It's still found in Rome, in Italy today. Remnants of it, what's ever left of it. It kind of got torn apart just a little bit. They needed building materials in medieval times, and so they started taking from it that way. So it's not completely there anymore. But it's this massive stadium-like structure. And what they would do is they would put on either theatrical performances there. They could actually flood the bottom of it, and you could do. They would recreate naval battles in there for entertainment purposes. I imagine you've heard of the gladiators before, the gladiatorial battles that would go on here. So some pretty intense stuff. They had another version of the Colosseum that was for like horse racing and chariot racing. Some pretty intense stuff there. But what does that tell us about a Roman society as a whole? They were what? They had time. Everybody got that? They had time. They were an extremely advanced civilization where entertainment became an important part of their lives. The Roman emperors also, they realized this, that if you could entertain the population, then you would also, in a way, you could distract them from other types of social issues that they normally would be more aware of, right? If they were more concerned about what was going on inside of the Colosseum, they could be less concerned about, poverty, right, or crime, or maybe corrupt aspects of government, whatever it may be, right? They get distracted by what is going on inside the Colosseum. And don't we do that a little bit today, right? When it comes, in the fall, and the football season rolls around, what do we do on Sundays or Sunday afternoons? A lot of us, right? Everything is warped around that big football game that we have on the weekend, right? So we want to see what's going on there, and our focus and our attention is so much on that it separates us from some of the other things, some of the other issues that would be, more. They would have more precedence if we weren't so distracted by, the entertainment that goes on Saturdays and Sundays with, college football and professional football. Okay, so we get, forms of entertainment, right? Forms of entertainment. And again, I want to emphasize that the Colosseum is not just for like these brutal gladiatorial things, but they did have theater-esque type performances there as well. And so, we distract ourselves with movies and other types of artistic performances at the same time. All right, we're not going to watch this particular video because it's long and it's a little bit dry. But this is another way in which Rome has affected us. It would be language, right? So our version of language, actually our alphabetical type of system, or our alphabetical system really relates a lot to what the Romans had. But even before that, if you go back to the very beginning, where does the written word come from? The ancient civilization from the Middle East. Ever remember that? The Sumerians, with their form of cuneiform, a pictographic type of writing, and so that progressed from civilization to civilization, and then we get to Rome, and what we think of the maybe European language has a lot of its roots from the Roman languages there. Okay, how else has Rome influence this today? This would be what? Government, right? So there's three big ways, right? So we've mentioned entertainment aspects of life, we mentioned language, and then we mentioned politics, okay? So what we have here is a balance of power, right? That's what the three branches of government is for, right? The balance of power. So, we have democracy, and it has its origins back in Athens, right? And then Sparta had a little bit of a democratic type of system with the assembly, that direct democracy, there being citizens, you could participate there. But that's, we need a different type of variation. So what they had in Rome was what they call a republic. You may want to write that down. A republic. And that's where they would have a senate. They had a couple of different types of assemblies that we'll get to a little bit later on. And they would have some type of leadership executive as well. But they needed a way of balancing that out. And so they, in a way, they were one of the first to have this balance of power with the branches of government idea. Okay? How else has Rome affected us today? I think we're going to watch this one. Okay? This one isn't very long.
Well, they call it a concrete jungle, and it certainly is. Actually, it's more like a concrete swamp. In fact, concrete defines the modern 20th century city. It was the invention of reinforced concrete that allowed architects like Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright to design extraordinary structures like this. But the other thing is, they were building concrete 2,000 years ago. Now, run, please. The Pantheon here was built by the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, and its dome is still one of the largest concrete domes in the world. It's 50 yards across, and the concrete is up to 20 feet thick. The word concrete comes from the Latin concretus, meaning grown together or hardened. Roman concrete was a mixture of sand, powdered limestone and stone rubble, pretty well what it is today. To construct arches and vaults, the Romans also developed a lighter mix, and the higher they went, the lighter they made the concrete. In this way, they could roof over much larger areas than would be possible with stone. One of the problems with concrete is that even after it's hardened, it still absorbs water. So the Romans added a mix of volcanic cinders and clay called pozzolana. Pozzolana reacts with the lime in the mortar and sets quickly. Most important of all, it's resistant to water. The Romans had invented damp-proof concrete, and they used it for the foundation of buildings like the Pantheon, for lining reservoirs, and for constructing harbours. Concrete allowed the Romans to build big and fast, and thus impose their authority on tribes still living in simple structures of wood or mud. Concrete may well have been one of the secret weapons of the Roman Empire.
Alright, so how else has Rome affected us today? The introduction of concrete. I mean, that's revolutionary. I mean, if you really think about our large metropolitan areas, they're pretty much covered in concrete that way. What was it that substance that the Romans introduced to make it less susceptible to water? Volcanic ash. Right? So they write that out to the side. So they were only able to discover that because they had extra time to experiment with it. Right? So again, that's a reflection of how advanced Rome's society is. Okay? Now remember, you got to think about how concrete really changes things. Instead of having to build things with stone, right, and cut the stone out and move the stone, concrete you can manipulate it, you can shape it, right? It's huge. Okay? Rome's origination story. So we'll go back to a little bit of history and go away from how it affected us. Don't have the video to show you here, but the two names that I want you to be aware of. There's a couple of creation stories for Rome. This is one of them. It's about Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus. Okay, so this is Roman mythology. Romulus and Remus were boys that were said to be abandoned from birth. You remember we mentioned infanticide the other day, where the Spartans, if they thought that the children were too puny, too weak to be a part of the Spartan society, they'd throw them out to the wilderness. Same idea applied to Romulus and Remus here in this context. Again, this is mythology, but the assumption is that Romulus and Remus didn't die, that they actually, it's termed, they're raised by wolves, right? Raised by wolves. So, eventually, they were rescued by a sheep herder at a particular location, and he took them in, and they eventually became young men, and once they became young men, they decided to go back to that location where they were rescued by that sheep herder, and they decided, hey, we're going to build a city here to reflect that particular event in our life, right? So they start to build the walls of this city, which eventually becomes Rome, right? And in the process of building those walls, Remus, let's see, how does it go? Yes, Remus was showing Romulus the deficiency of the wall that he was creating by jumping over Romulus's wall. Romulus took great offense to Remus jumping over his wall, and so Romulus killed Remus. And so there's only Romulus left over, and there's no more Remus. And so Rome is named after Romulus rather than after Remus. Sound good? So that's the quick summary of Romulus and Remus, and the origination of Rome. Again, that is mythology. There's one other story for the original inhabitants of Rome. Common. It's about the Aeneid. The Aeneid reflects upon the survivors of Troy. You guys remember the Trojan War that we referenced the other day with the documentary? It said that there were some people that got out before the Troy was burned to the ground, and so they traveled, wandered aimlessly throughout the Mediterranean for a while, and eventually they found themselves to where Rome is located today, and they were eventually became the original inhabitants of Rome. That's the other mythological story associated with the origination of Rome. It's called, I believe, with the Aeneid. Okay. All right. Rome's rise to an empire. I'd like you to write the words Punic Wars out here. So when did Rome become the greatest civilization at that point in time? Okay. Well, they had to go through a series of 3 wars, which is termed the Punic Wars, and there were 2 great city-states that were competing against one another here. It would be Rome, found here in the boot of Italy, right? And then there was Carthage, that was over here in the northern portions of Africa. Sound good? There were a series of wars, 3 wars altogether, and in each of those wars, it seemed like Rome was about ready to lose, but in all 3 of them, Rome eventually somehow found a way to fight back and to survive and defeat Carthage. Sound good? So just remember that Rome beat Carthage in all 3 of those wars. Okay. Finishing up, talk about Roman architecture and Roman social classes. With Roman architecture, how do they differ from the Greeks? They use a lot of arches and a lot of vaulting. So over here, this is your Roman architecture. With vaulting, you can create large open spaces. Okay. With the Greeks, if you think about the Parthenon, they had what they call the post and lintel system. You may write that down, memorize that. So arches and vaulting with Rome, and post and lintel system with the Greeks. I was going to bring in Preston's blocks. You guys remember playing with blocks when you were growing up, right? And Preston and I try to build things with those blocks. And what I do is I build these, structures that kind of look like pyramids sometimes, but I have to go the blocks this way, and then I put one on top, right? 2 this way, and then 1 on top. I'm limited on what I can create whenever I do it that way. That's the post and lintel system, right? So if you think about the Parthenon here, look at all the posts that are inside of the Parthenon. Do they have like a big open space inside? No, because it's got these posts all over the place. It looks like a huge structure, but it's not like an open gymnasium. You guys understand what I'm saying? It's filled up with these posts because that's the method by which they built things. They didn't have anything else, available to them. Well, the Romans came up with this dome-shaped vaulting type of method, which is really based off of this idea of a keystone at the top, where everything gains more and more pressure, and it's off of this one stone that connects everything in the middle, and that can create a large open space. Okay, so when you think about like the cathedrals that you see in medieval Europe, those are really based off of that idea of Roman architecture. These large domes, okay, create larger open spaces. All right. Again, you can see remnants or reflection of, this is in Washington, D.C., right? You got Abraham Lincoln back in here with the Lincoln Memorial. But it's a reflection of Greek architecture, okay? That's Roman architecture with a large open dome, okay? This is something else that I'd like you to mention or write down. It's called an aqueduct. Aqueduct, A-Q-U-E-D-U-C-T. And it's a means by which you can transport water over long distances. And this is a combination of the technology of building arches as well as concrete. Right? The structure is really based off of concrete. And so what you could do is your water source could be miles and miles and miles away. But you could build an aqueduct to get that water to go over the course of many, many miles, and then you could transport it into like a large metropolitan area like Rome itself, and then you don't have to worry about water so much. You understand what I'm saying? So you got these community fountains. I mean, it's some good stuff there, okay? There were some luxuries of being Roman. They had bathhouses, right? And in these bathhouses, you'd have these large pools, and they'd have different temperatures for the pools. You'd have like one that would be really, really hot. You would have one that would be really, really cold, and then you would have one that was kind of lukewarm, and you would go from one to the next to, relax, right, to cleanse oneself there, okay? The one that was really, really hot, they would have like fires underneath it, heating up the water that way. So, again, pretty intense stuff. We kind of take this for granted, but they had plumbing and public restrooms in Rome, okay? And so this is a reflection of, this is a public restroom facility in Rome, and you may think, well, there's not much privacy here. You gotta think about the clothing that they're wearing in the first place, the toga, right? With the long toga, do you really need all that much privacy? Do you need walls to separate yourself? You have a long gown-like structure or dress. That's going to create some privacy in the first place. That's both male and female, of course, there in that scenario. So, no need for walls, I guess, there. And the social norms could be a little bit different. The expectations there could be a little bit different as well. Remember, they've got these public bathhouses, right, where it's going to be, the norm's going to be much different there as well. They have a sewage system in Rome. I want you to think about, time after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You get to medieval Europe and you get some of these more agrarian-esque type of communities. What did they do with their sewage? Where did it go? Yeah, it goes into the street, right? A lot of times they don't have like a ditch running through the middle of town, right? You wonder why the plague happened. Because their exposure to sewage on a regular basis, okay? Rome, they could get rid of the sewage. They had a sewer-esque type system, okay? Again, last thing, this is about the Roman government. Again, branches of government, balance of power. They were conquered by, they had a original Rome, very small, and they were conquered by an outside group called the Etruscans, and the Etruscans introduced kings. They had a series of, I believe, 7 Etruscan kings, so they had a monarchy at the very beginning. And they transitioned from that to a representative type of government. And they elected magistrates, a senate to advise the consul and then public assembly. So initially what they did was they wanted to go away from complete power of the monarchy. They wanted to have somebody here off to the side to advise the monarchy, and that began to develop initiate this idea of the Senate. And so you had balance of power there, and then eventually the assembly became bigger and bigger. You had a couple different types of assemblies. You had one that was ran by the patricians and one that was represented by the plebeians. I want you to write those two terms down, patrician and plebeian. Those are two key terms. It's really reflective of social class in Rome. Patrician means rich and wealthy, and plebeian means, bottom, lower social class. Okay? Plebeian is like a commoner. Patrician is like a wealthy landowner. Okay? And they had two assemblies, one that would be represented by the plebeians, and then one would be represented by the patricians. And both of those would help to balance out the power of the consul. The consul would be the position of emperor, right? We pretty much already summarized that there. Okay? But again, initially these plebeians, they really didn't have all that much power. But eventually, over the course of time and history in Rome, the plebeians became more and more powerful, and were able to influence political decisions.